Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to each of you. Indeed, it's very warm. I'm hoping it's going to cool down the moment we are closing the doors. My name is Annika Aldag, and I'm the director of the Museum of Art and Photography. Tonight, we're privileged to host a conversation with Arundhati Roy, a writer, thinker, activist, whose work has consistently challenged us to see the world with greater clarity and fierce, unwavering compassion. Joining her in conversation is journalist Nandini Nair, who will guide us through an exploration of Arundhati Roy's latest memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me, and the broader landscape of a life spent in service of truth. The talk is titled Writing in the Present, a phrase that captures the delicate, often dangerous work of capturing a world in flux. We hope that the discussion today will invite us all to look beyond the page, into the extraordinary life that the author lives and the vital networks of care and solidarity that Roy has both fostered and participated in. In the context of modern India, and indeed across a world facing unprecedented crises, these connections represent our most resilient defense against fragmentation and despair. And we believe that institutions like ours, museums, must serve as a living sanctuary, holding space for the voices that demand we look closer and feel more deeply. It is within these walls that the personal and the political find a common language, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the act of coming together to listen, to witness, is an act of hope and joy. Before we begin, some house rules. We request you to remain seated through the course of the program and keep your phones on silent. We are recording the conversation and it will be made available on MAP's YouTube channel soon. I also want to acknowledge our ISL interpreters for the evening, Rajesh and Shivoy, who will be on stage throughout. After the conversation, which will run until 7:30, Arundhati will sign books till about 8 p.m. The MAP team will help manage this, so we would appreciate everyone's patience and cooperation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Arundhati Roy and Nandini Nair.
That lovely welcome. It's been about 7 months since Mother Mary has been published. Do I need it? Was that? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. So it's been about 7 months since Mother Mary Comes to Me has been published, and you know I've sort of traveled around the world doing readings and things, and mostly when it first came out, I used to read from the beginning of the book because, you know, people hadn't read it. So now I'm hoping that many of you have, because I have to entertain myself, right? So I have to read from some other parts which I don't normally read from. So basically I'll do a reading because, you know, ultimately whatever it is, I just keep returning to the text because that's what I trust the most, even about myself. So when you said beyond the page, I don't know if there's any beyond the page for me. I am the page. I'm just like, that's what I do. You need it? Oh, okay. But I stand. I can. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So, lapel mic. Okay now? Yes. Okay. So the part I'm going to read right now is when I'm in sort of second year in the School of Architecture, and there's already a massive growing tension between me and Mrs. Roy, which is what I had to call my mother, who ran a school in this little town in Kottayam.
called Kotem. And the reference to the character called JC was, I first met him when I was still in school, and he was working with this legendary architect called Laurie Baker, and I was in class 11 and saw him and lusted after him, but never spoke to him, and my mother got furious about this and threw me out of the car. Anyway, so there was a history to JC which you need to know to understand this, because then I went to the School of Architecture and met him again. So as a young girl growing up in Kottayam on a diet of Malayalam films in which almost always the heroine got raped, I used to believe that all women were raped, and it was just a matter of when and where. That accounted for the knife in my bag when I first arrived at the Nizamuddin station in Delhi. Surrounded by these stories that used fear to control us, for the women in Kottayam, particularly for her girl students, Mrs. Roy was the hope for escape. She was the burning flame of courage and defiance. She lit their path. She showed the way. Not so for me. My escape route always circled back to what I was trying to escape from. When it came to me, Mrs. Roy taught me how to think and then raged against my thoughts. She taught me to be free and raged against my freedom. She taught me to write and resented the author I became. I returned to Delhi, so this is, during the vacations I'm talking about this. I returned to Delhi a second-year student. I would turn 18 in a few months. I had become a city creature by then, acutely aware of what was going on around me. In all of this, I was backed by JC, who was in his final year and doing his thesis on the resettlement of former residents of Turkman Gate whose homes had been bulldozed during the emergency. They had been flung away to the outskirts of Delhi where they lived in tin shacks and had no work, no way of earning their living. JC and I were wrapped around each other, and it was almost impossible to imagine a life when this had not been so. We worked hard, walked around the city, and went to movies screened for free by various embassies. It was a somewhat different experience from watching movies in Star Theatre in Kottayam. As a shout out to movie-going men in Kottayam, on our way back to the bus stop from the Archana Theatre in Delhi, where we went most often, I made it a point of peeing on rich people's lawns that we had to walk past. I was happy and breathing deep, perhaps for the first time in my life. I loved the city, the suit, the chaos, and above all, the anonymity. Towards the end of my second year, JC and I were lovers. I got the boy, I got his body, and I got his ugly shirt. It was a shirt that was so ugly that I loved it. I wrote to Mrs. Roy and told her that far from thinking that I was a fool, JC was my boyfriend. Terrible mistake. I can't believe I was so stupid. So this next chapter is called, Doesn't She Sound Like That Person in The Exorcist? The summer holidays of 1978, after I'd completed my second year, would be my last in Kerala. As the train pulled into Kottayam station, I saw that Amal, a relatively new recruit to the roster of maintenance staff in the school, had been sent to pick me up. Immediately, my mind set to decoding what that meant. Was she, because my brother and I only used to refer to our mother as she. So was she angry, busy, or out of town? That's what living inside a cult does to you. Members must constantly read the signs, test the air, and whisper and wonder about what the mother guru's mood of the moment is and how to position oneself. Amal was the older of two quarrelsome sisters who had recently joined the cult. They were both unmarried and in their 30s, and both, unusually for Kottayam, entirely illiterate. Mariama, the younger of the two, was an exceptional cook and worked in the kitchen. But Amal's job was in HQ, the personal care and the round-the-clock adoration of Mrs. Roy. Amal fulfilled her duties with evangelical zeal. She bore my mother's tantrums by chastising herself even more than my mother did, beating her chest, slapping herself, hiding under the table or under my mother's bed, and asking God to forgive her for the coffee not being hot enough, the lime juice not being cold enough, the fish not being fresh enough. She would emerge from the office bedroom with food dripping down her face or a tray full of smashed glass. She dodged flying teacups and mopped up pools of hot tea. She insisted it was all a manifestation of her Kochama's, little mother's, love for her. She flew into a jealous rage when my mother got angry at someone else. She wanted it all for herself. As soon as she spotted me on the station platform, Amal rushed towards me. Her eyes were blurry and fat tears made their way down her cheeks. That only made me smile. She held both her arms up to heaven like a Jehovah's Witness and looked as though she might start speaking in tongues. She spoke a kind of biblical, overdramatic Malayalam. Her body vibrated and her drooping earlobes juddered under the weight of her heavy gold earrings, and her voice quivered. As Christ is my witness, it's only because she loves you. And she began beating her chest really hard. I had to put down my bag and hold both her hands in mine to stop her. Okay, enough. Just tell me, what is it? What are our orders? Shall I just lie down right here and die? She looked around, worried that a passing spy might have overheard my disrespectful tone. Her eyes turned conspiratorial. She lowered her voice to a whisper to communicate the instructions. Kochama doesn't want to see you. You must stay in the sick room. You'll get your food there. You are not to appear before her. She doesn't want to set eyes on you. And the tears began again. It's only because she loves you. In my head, the Beatles went, yeah, yeah, yeah. I put my arm around Amal's shoulders. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, dressed in full regalia, got off the train too and followed us down the Kottayam railway station platform all the way to our school, hostel, home on the hill. Each time I came home from Delhi, more buildings had come up on the new campus, dorms, classrooms, a library. Mrs. Roy's school was all the rage. The cult, including students, teachers, and maintenance staff, was nearly 300, and parents were booking places for their children even before they were born. As her school grew and consolidated its reputation, Mrs. Roy embarked on a campaign of radical kindness. Radical because her kindness was gruff, practical, and asked nothing in return. It was politics by other means, the best kind. When she heard of women in distress or heard about terrible incidents in the papers, she walked into hospitals and courtrooms and offered women her protection. She didn't commiserate or try to console them. She offered them an option. If they weren't quick to recognize it, she walked away. If they misused it or snibbled or solicited sympathy, she kicked them out. There was nothing of the charitable do-gooder or social worker in her. Her actions came from a sense of steely outrage. She gave scholarships to orphans and jobs to women who had been abandoned or abused by their husbands or other men. She had a way of comforting children who were traumatized by the death of a parent or grandparent, in a way insulating from a way of insulating them from the pain before the blow fully landed. The campus was buzzing with bright-eyed little humans going about their busy days. It was such a happy place. Quite often, I found myself wishing I were her student and not her daughter. It has taken me years to come to terms with the fact that I was a middle child, one of 3 siblings, not 2. My older sibling was a boy, and my younger sibling was a school. There was never any doubt about who our mother's favorite child was. She loved, fought for, and protected her youngest child with everything she had. That kind of focused, ferocious love, regardless of what it may choose as its object, is a blessed love. The challenge for those of us who are not chosen and instead watch love pass us by is to learn from it, marvel at it, and not grow bitter and incapable of love ourselves. Then last summer, when home stopped being home, my brother was there too. He had just graduated from his college in Madras and wasn't sure what to do next. We never spoke to each other about anything real, he and I, especially not our feelings. We didn't need to, we understood each other perfectly. We could sit together for hours and not speak. A week or so after my banishment to the sick room, a chit was delivered to me. Chits were delivered to people up and down the hill, and they were feared because they usually bore bad tidings. Mine said, "Baker is coming for lunch tomorrow. You will lay the table in the teacher's dining room and make sure that you are present." The unspoken instructions were, of course, you will make intelligent conversation and not appear to be a complete fool. Now, Baker, obviously, he was my hero. I was in the School of Architecture, and he's such an amazing architect. What would Janis Joplin have done if her mother had asked her to lay the table? She'd have probably lain on it and humped it and said, "Look, Ma, no hands." I had no clue how to lay a table. My mother had forgotten to teach me the manners and social graces of cosmopolitans. Baker arrived in his genial, cheerful way with no idea what he was walking into. I can't remember a single thing that was said. In my memory of that meal, except for the clinking of the crockery and cutlery, the soundtrack is switched off. It was the last time I met him before I graduated. But I gained nothing from that occasion because my ears were humming and my stomach muscles were rigid in preparation for the coming assault. And once Baker left, it began. It started with the coffee cups, which turned out to have been teacups being smashed. In all these years, you haven't managed to learn the difference between teacups and coffee cups. And then the insults washed over me like a tide. Apart from the usual ones, the additional theme, of course, was whore and prostitute. It went on forever while everybody watched. That was the thing. Everybody watched. We had no home, no privacy. She would calm down and then get incensed and start screaming again in waves. Eventually, she left the dining room and began to walk down the stone steps cut into the hillside to her office bedroom, screaming all the way so the whole school could hear. Even the fish in the fish tank looked alarmed. I imagined everything in the school had come to a standstill, teachers immobilized, chalk in hand, children with open books, athletes mid-sprint, toys mid-squeak. That a woman in our part of the world could wield such power all those years ago was something I was aware of even back then, in the middle of that storm. Once she quietened down, everybody went back to whatever they had been doing, and I sat on the steps, exhausted and oddly relieved. My brother appeared from nowhere and sat next to me. The silence sat between us like a third person, a well-loved friend. Suddenly, without looking at me, he said, "Doesn't she sound like that person in The Exorcist?" I couldn't help laughing. It was the first time either of us had admitted to ourselves or each other what we were going through. "I don't know when I'll ever see you again," I said, "but I'll never come home again." "But what will you do? How will you manage?" "I don't know, work, whatever. I'll find a way, but I'm never coming back." For the rest of that summer break, like millions of others in troubled homes, I listened to the Beatles' "She's Leaving Home" on a loop. I was 10 years too late, a couple of continents removed, and completely alone. Even the very poor had families, communities. I had nobody. There were no kind relatives. There was no commune to join, no hate Ashbury. I knew of no other young woman like myself who were on the loose. And Mrs. Roy was nothing like the clueless parents in that Beatles song. I was luckier than Dido, at least, the last member of the cult, known to have been upfront about her boyfriend. She had arrived as a puppy when we were still in the hostel home next to the Rotary Club. When she was full grown and stood on her hind legs with her paws on my shoulders, she was as tall as I was. We would dance together. She would let me bite her. Her stomach was the safest place in the world for me to park my face. She slept on my bed and took up most of the space. When I was sent away to boarding school, I missed her more than anyone else. When I returned home for my holidays, she wasn't there. She hadn't killed herself for love, like Dido, Queen of Carthage. Mrs. Roy had had her shot because she mated with an unknown street dog. It was a kind of honor killing. She was buried at the back of the house. Dido was 3, I was 13. There was no question of my reacting or asking questions, because the only response would have been an attack of asthma and perhaps a trip to the hospital, which would have been my fault. For some reason, Dido's empty kennel, which was as big as a little room, moved with us to the new campus and stood there, empty. During those last few weeks at home, I wanted to live in it. I didn't, of course. I would have risked being shot too. At the end of the holidays, I trained my mind as best as I could to shed every vestige of the valiant organ child. Well, that's a reference to when I was very young and she couldn't breathe. I would be like, I'll breathe for you, so I was like her outsourced lung. So I shed every vestige of the valiant organ child. After I returned to Delhi, I wrote and told her that I loved her, and I really did. But I wouldn't be coming home again, and that I would no longer need any money from her. Her responses were so insulting that I stopped reading them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arundhati, for that wonderful reading. Like you said at the beginning, the book has been out for a while, so we're going to assume that most people have read it. And I'm going to try and ask you slightly different questions, hopefully things that you haven't been asked many times before. But before that, I want to just step back a little bit and just drawing from your reading, talk about how I think this book is, of course, about a mother and child and the relationship between the two, but it's also about so much more. And I think it tells us why the central concern of Arundhati Roy's work is the conflict between power and powerlessness, and those who have a voice and those who are voiceless. I think she also reminds us that there is no one who is voiceless. Instead, there are people who've been denied a voice. And I think that comes out wonderfully in this book because she shows us that she writes about those who have suffered injustice, not from on top of a watchtower, but while she is in the trenches. And I think that's what makes this book remarkable, and that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. I was reading some of your old interviews, and you have this wonderful description when I think your publisher from the UK asks you a very simple question, and he says, "What is Azadi to you?" And you reply immediately, and you say, "It's a novel." So if a novel is Azadi, what is Mother Mary Comes to Me?
Mother Mary Comes to Me is a novelist's memoir. Therefore, it's a form of Azadi too, because in the mind of a fiction writer such as myself, the border between fiction and non-fiction is very, very porous. So in my fiction are sorts of characters adapted or inspired from my life. And in this book, some of the fictional characters are more real to me than real people. Sometimes the imagination or like people think that I live alone, but I am never alone because there are all these characters who I have either created or supplemented my own reality in some ways. I don't know what reality is. It is actually even the wall between imagination and reality for someone like an artist or a person whose work involves the imagination is so porous. But I actually, this, let me see, right in the beginning of the book, I actually talk about this, what is this book? Yeah. So when The God of Small Things came out, my mother's first reaction was to check herself into hospital.
because she thought, oh my God, it's going to be some sort of expose or something. So she went to hospital and then she read it, and it took her a while to understand that, I'm not interested in cheap shots at people. So then she cooled off and she came home, and then she said, yeah, it's quite okay. It's a nice book. It's well written. And then she summoned me to her bedside. I'll just read this paragraph because it talks about this interesting border. When the book came out, oh, by the way, before that, I say on the front of The God of Small Things, it says, to Mary Roy, who loved me enough to let me go. And so when she passed away, a lot of young people in Kerala made these videos of that page and, talking about love and ferocity and letting you be free and so on. And my brother's like, yeah, that's the only real piece of fiction in that book. So anyway, when the book came out, she was worried about what secrets it might reveal. To be safe, she checked herself into hospital and read it hurriedly. Anyway, and then she summons me to her room. It was a bright afternoon, and the light that floated through the curtains was bordello red. Her eyes were shut. She said she thought it was a good book, well written, and she wanted to know about a particular passage, one in which Amu's 7-year-old twins, Esteban and Rahel, remembered their parents fighting and how they grew huge like giants and pushed the children from one to the other, saying, you take them, I don't want them. Who told you this? You were too young to remember. So I said, it's fiction. She said, no, it's not. And she turned to the wall. I have never felt the weight or the sorrow of this memory. I really believed it was fiction. And I learned that day that most of us are a living, breathing soup of memory and imagination, and that we may not be the best arbiters of which is which. So, read this book as you would a novel. It makes no larger claim, but then there can be no larger claim, because fiction is that strange, smoky thing that writers don't entirely own, even if they think they do. Where does it come from? Our past, our present, our reading, our imagination, yes, but perhaps from premonitions of our future too. How else can it be that, like the characters in my second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I too am now the caretaker of a sort of grave in the grounds of a sort of guest house. It's outlandish, it keeps me awake at night, but then I ask myself, why should we know everything? So, thank you. But, so this differentiation where people sort of make out that fiction is imagination and non-fiction is facts and one is true and one is not. To me, great fiction is the truest thing there is. And then today, what is non-fiction? Is it what we think of as non-fiction is probably more fake than anything else, So ultimately, you're just left with the pursuit of beautiful writing, because I believe that when writing is truly beautiful, it becomes as precise as music or mathematics, because that, it hits that note and it's not a false note. And that is what one aspires towards,
You said something when you went up on to give the reading that you are the page. And I want to just draw that to what you're saying now about the importance of language to you, right? And it's incredible how you keep going back to the book, because I think that that's where you're sort of at your best, your finest. That beautiful language is there. And I think finally for you, home is language, right? I think that's your tool. It is your home. It's also what you wield the best. And can we talk a little bit about that, about how, and I think you knew God of Small Things by memory, which is amazing. That's an entire novel and you could recite it. So can we talk a little bit about just language being your home and how you are the page?
Well, there's a lot about it in my book, and while the part that I read out perhaps is a part where Mrs. Roy comes across as a particularly cruel person, she was also the giver to me of gifts. And she was the person who showed me how to read and encouraged me to write what I was thinking. And she was very unforgiving if you used borrowed thoughts or borrowed language, because in those days you were like given all that Enid Blyton type of nonsense, and you had to really grab your own way of seeing out of that morass, So for me, how that hunt for language, which here I say, like I knew a long time ago, I knew that language was outside of me, and I needed it. I was like this predator, and I knew that it was grazing somewhere, and I had to hunt it down and drink its inky blood. I had to kill it, and it had to be mine. It had to be a language that I used, and not language that used me. It had to be a language that somehow reflected this multilingual world that we live in, like, whether the God of Small Things, mostly set in Kerala, and the Ministry of Utmost Happiness had so many characters in it who even in the novel speak different languages and are constantly having to translate to each other. And it was almost a book that existed in translation before it became English, So it's not about mother tongue or about some sort of ethnic chauvinism but how does a writer find a language that they govern and doesn't govern them? And a lot of this book is about that search. And also, I think it was that hunt and that way of constantly trying to express my thinking that I wrote myself out of my life that I was trapped in, I had to keep sort of, I think I said this yesterday too, that I was like, there's one half of me that was taking the hits and one half of me was somewhere on the fan taking notes, But there's and then there's this language. I think I'm a little like a little bit of a bloodhound when it comes to that, because even public language, when the nuclear tests happened and all this sort of nationalism became something allowed, I could sense language had changed, and something was going to follow that change of language. Even if you look at partition, actually language was partitioned before India and Pakistan became separate countries, Hindustani, Hindi, Urdu, Sanskrit, people, we began to deplete language. Who depletes their language? But we depleted our language. We banned, influences and so on. I've written a whole piece about that in this book called Azadi, called In What Language Does Rain Fall on Tormented Cities. But otherwise too, it's like, I'll tell you a language story. I was, at the time when I was, very closely involved with the Narmada movement, I was invited, there was something called the World Water Forum or something at The Hague, and I was supposed to go there, and I said, no, I don't do this stuff. And then I heard that the Indian government was sending a delegation of ministers and so on, essentially to promote big dams and to promote the privatization of water and so on. So I just showed up there as a disruptive force, And I was on this panel, which was supposed to be a panel of writers. And everyone was supposed to introduce themselves and say why they write about water. And they were all, basically, none of them were writers. They were policy writers and all represented, private water companies. And I was the last speaker, so the guy before me was some American who said, my name is whatever, Robert something, and I write about water because I'm paid to. And I just want to say that God gave us the rivers, but he didn't put in the delivery systems. And for this, we need private enterprise. So So I said, well, my name is Arundhati, and I write about water because I'd be paid a great deal not to. and then I was like, it's been a long time since I've been in a room full of dead people, but hello anyway. And then I was like, how do you call yourselves writers, is my question to you. Because writers, real writers, they spend their life trying to close the gap between language and thought. And you spend your life trying to develop a language that masks thought. When you say freedom, you mean the opposite. When you say deepening democracy, you mean the opposite. When you say empowering women, you mean the opposite. So find some other name to describe yourself, but don't call yourselves writers,
Talking about deepening democracy, I just want to segue a little bit. So I think you've also maybe spoken about this before, but maybe we can build on it, about how in this book, you of course have a tumultuous relationship with your mother, but she's also the life force. And I think you've said that, I think ultimately this book is a declaration of love. I think that comes out very clearly. And every reader should get that. You've also said, for example, the connection between Mother Mary and Mother India, right? So of course you have a tumultuous relationship with the country.
I've never said that, but maybe someone else did.
But you would not leave it, right? And you've said, I think, that if you would leave it, your leaves would shed. So maybe we can talk a little bit about Mother India and Mother Mary and your relationship with both.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody did say this, that this kind of really conflicted, rocky relationship between Mrs. Roy and myself somehow mirrors the relationship between me and this notion of Mother India, although, Father Israel is also coming to the picture somehow. I don't know. But yeah, I suppose when I thought about it, I did smile because there is something there. That person did have their finger on something. Because, I think that the idea is central to so much of what so many of us do, whether it is us as artists or whether it is us as people who are arguing whether it's about dams or whatever it's about. Central to so much of it is love. It is love that then makes us so angry, because there is something that you love that you're fighting to save. And I don't love countries. I can't come out and say, I love my country, because it sounds like low IQ, Like, what does it even mean? I don't know. But there's so much about the place, the society, the mountains, the rivers, the battles, the fact as a writer that you know these things, and this is your space, and this is the place you fight, you argue, you love, you sing, you protect. And there's no question of leaving and going to live somewhere else, and then saying, oh my God, I have to pay very high taxes, or they are getting after me. I've seen, I find it so terrifying, because I have seen so many people, either for whatever reasons, who've had to be pushed out of their countries, who have had to escape, not voluntarily, but involuntarily. And it's the most lonely thing you can possibly imagine, And here is where we stage our battles, So whether it was the case with Mrs. Roy, or whether it's the case with whatever battles one is involved in here, no one's going to push me out. This is my place. And no one's going to tell me, like, am I national, anti-national? Who the hell is going to define that for me, So, yes, there is a parallel there.
I think one thing you've often said about the book is how, your own life is a footnote to history. And especially when people are kind of taken aback by the level of adversity you have faced as a child and, in terms of growing up, etc. But one thing I've also found that you've always held back from using terms like abuse. You kind of wince at that, even words like trauma, etc. We spoke about this briefly, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about it. What do you make of this time when people are probably using terms like trigger warning, trauma, a little too easily? What do you make of this whole sort of, does this capture the magnitude of human experience, or are we kind of reducing it? And why you've sort of ensured or tried to ensure that you don't make this book into one of those terms?
Well, look, I'm not, first of all, there are people who are genuinely traumatized. There are people who suffer from structural discrimination. As we know, this is a country that, there's nothing that I despise more about Indian society than its practice of caste. And I don't think that as long as it continues to be practiced, we will ever get anywhere. That is just for sure. So I don't want to put myself in that category of people who have been, traumatized. I'll actually just read this here, Well, I said that when my mother died, I was wrecked and heart smashed, and I'm puzzled and a little more, and more than a little ashamed by the intensity of my response. And my brother put his finger sharply on that nerve. I don't understand your reaction. She treated nobody as badly as he treated you. She treated you. He could be right, although according to me, it was he who held that trophy. I can understand him feeling that I was humiliating myself by not acknowledging what had happened to us as children. But I had put that behind me a long time ago. I have seen and written about such sorrow, such systemic deprivation, such unmitigated wickedness, such diverse iterations of hell, that I can only count myself among the most fortunate. I have thought of my own life as a footnote to the things that really matter, never tragic, often hilarious. Or perhaps this is the lie I tell myself. Maybe I pitched my tent where the wind blows strongest, hoping it would blow my heart clean out of my body. Perhaps what I'm about to write is a betrayal of my younger self by the person I have become. If so, it's no small sin, but I'm in no position to be the judge of that. So the thing is that I think because the book is called Mother Mary Comes to Me, people assume it's a book about the relationship between a mother and a daughter. It's not really, it's Mother Mary Comes to Me is a kind of, it's about an effect that it had, And of course, it's a line from a Beatles song. But I think that both Mrs. Roy and I were women who lived outside the home. We lived in the world, and we argued or whatever it is with the world, and we were so alert to everything that was happening outside. We could not just look at our own wounds, And for me, I think human beings are absurd in how long they want to extend their childhoods. Like you're a bloody grandfather and you're still complaining about your mother did to you or what your father did to you. We have to end that at some stage. It has a shelf life, And also that mothers aren't just mothers, They are people who've had their stories. They are people who've been traumatized too, and they are people who sometimes pass down that trauma. And at some point, you have to meet each other as adults, And I met my mother as an adult very, very early on in my life, because I knew that to have expectations of her, of a mother, or a father for that matter, or anybody in my family would have been the end of me, So I don't have this idea that I was traumatized or abused or anything, because I didn't have any expectations. I removed myself from that situation quickly because I didn't want to be abused and traumatized. And I had so many social advantages in that sense, that I was educated, I spoke English. I purposely went to the School of Architecture so I could start working. When I was 16, I started working, you know. So if I had a wound, the wound was to see other wounds, other people's wounds, you know, and that is what made me the writer that I am. But I don't feel, I mean, you know, I don't feel that this is not that book, if anyone's expecting it to be, you know, about, oh, I suffered so much. I admired her so much, you know, and I just felt that it was my business to move myself into a safe distance from the whirlwind and do whatever I had to do. So there is a part in this book where I left home, of course, to join the School of Architecture at 16. At 18, I stopped going home, stopped taking money, and for 7 years, there was no contact. She had no idea where I was or whether I was alive or dead or anything. And then when I was about 25 was the time when she came to Delhi because she was challenging that Syrian Christian inheritance law, which basically didn't allow women to inherit anything. And she came to Delhi, and that's how we re-met. And I went with her to the house of an older woman who, she was, you know, meeting other Syrian Christian women, and this lady listened to her talking about why women should inherit and all this. And then she said, but Mrs. Roy, why are you trying to destroy our beautiful community? So I, of course, was young, and I had this urge to, I've said it here, I had this urge to sweep all those mementos off her table, coffee table, and say, hey, do you know who you just met? You know, she's not fighting only for equal inheritance laws. She's fighting for the right not to be a perfect mother, not to be an obedient woman, and most of all, not to be a fucking bore like you know?
You just now said how you met your mother as an adult very early on. And that's something, again, about how you didn't write this book to understand. You already understood. How did you understand? How did you become so adult so soon?
Well, I didn't have an option, you know, because my mother was very, she left, my parents separated when I was just under 3 years old. So we really didn't even know who our father was. And she went through a period of terrible, she had asthma, she couldn't breathe, she was all the time almost about to die, she had no money. And the success and all this came much later with the school. So in my early childhood, there was this constant thing of, I'm about to die, and what are you going to do, and no one will look after you, and you'll be on the street, and so on. So I really had to deal with the idea of her death like 50 times a day, you know. So and because of the asthma, there was never a possibility of talking to her. Because if you said anything that she didn't like, then she would just get asthma, you know. So people were like, you know, why did you write the book after she died? I said, because I couldn't speak to her at all. So this is me speaking to her right up to the end. There was no possible, I mean, like she never asked me, why did you leave home? How did you manage? How did you finish your school? How did you pay your fees? Nothing. So even right to the end, she never asked. But it was fine because I just didn't have any expectation, you know. So then you meet her and you look at the battles she's fought in the world, and you look at her school, which is still running. It's so beautiful, you know. You look at the gift she gave to generations of her students. And unless you're a very small person who's busy examining their own navel and their own wounds, you cannot not see what an amazing woman she was, you know. So for me, I had to understand her in order to survive her. I could not wait until I'm as old as I am to write a book to understand her. I had to understand her from the time I was 5. In fact, I think one of the strangest things about me was that as a very young child, I never had the opportunity or option of of not understanding, because she was there getting insulted, getting humiliated by the rest of the community until she became the diva that she was. And all that anger would be unloaded onto us. So you could just see it like a chemical experiment, you know. So understanding was a way of surviving. And you know, writing was something that wasn't just to do with, oh, I'll write a book or I'll write a story, or it was a way of speaking to myself, a way of letting the blood flow easy in my body, you know.
You just mentioned your father in passing, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about him, because your mother is, of course, very well known. She's an icon, you know, in Kerala and far beyond. Your father, there's this chapter when you meet him, when you're in your 20s, and your brother calls you, and he says that, I have this news, and he's excited, but you are kind of shell-shocked. So maybe can you talk a little bit about meeting him, and also, I think you've said how that was one of the most difficult chapters to write, and I'm kind of curious why.
It was and wasn't, in the sense that my father, we had these 2 or 3 sentences about him, you know. Firstly, she would say, he's a nothing man. This was her description of him.
Also a Beatles song.
Yeah, well, that was a nowhere man.
Oh, no man, sorry.
So he's a nothing man. And then we had these 2 or 3 photos that we used to be allowed to look at occasionally. And otherwise, there was just no conversation, except that if there was anything like we did which she didn't like, she would be like, oh, you got that from your father. So it was like one half of us was a litter bin into which any kind of rubbish could be thrown, you know. And that was about it. And my brother was older than me and remembered him a bit. I didn't. And then I left home, and I had no mother, no father, no job, no money, no nothing. As I said, you know, motherless, fatherless, homeless, reckless person. And I was actually, I had finished architecture, and I had finished architecture, and I'd also acted in Masi Saab, the film which Pradeep was making. But I was living on my own in a barsati, in a room. I had no money. I was just like only thinking, I used to only think of money, basically. And I had no phone, obviously, or nothing. My brother, he saw a little piece of news in India today about Masi Saab, in which it said that, you know, here's this young woman, whatever, and it said the film has been produced by the National Film Development Corporation. So he got in touch with them. They gave him Pradeep's number. He called Pradeep and he said, do you know this Arundhati? She's my sister, and how can I get in touch with her? So Pradeep said, well, she doesn't have a phone, and, you know, if I see her, if you leave me a number, I'll tell her to call. So I got this number, and I went to a mithai shop in Nizamuddin, because I used to live there, and I felt, you know, like somehow I felt I needed to be in some familiar place, and I called, and it was a hotel in Paharganj, one of those, you know, hippie hotels. And my brother just came on the phone. I've not spoken to him for 7 years. And he's so excited, and he says, guess who's with me? And I said, Baba. Because I don't know how I knew from the tone of his voice that he had gone and found our father, you know. And anyway, the next day I went to this hotel to meet my dad. I was just looking at myself in the mirror the whole night. I don't know, I was so shallow. I was like, what is he going to look like, and all this, you know. And then it was, I mean, there's a long description of it here, but it was just crazy, because it was in this room where the bed took up all the space, and he sort of stood up on the bed, and was a scrawny man with, like, he was addicted to alcohol. He had been in Mother Teresa's home for the dying destitute, but he was just completely happy with himself, you know. And I had to sort of climb onto the bed, and the 3 of us shook hands. So I said it was like the Yalta conference, you know, Roosevelt and Stalin. And then first thing he said to me was, oh, hi, so do you still use bad language? I said, I beg your pardon, I was like 2 years old when I saw you last, so I know what you're talking about. Yeah, you were a very, very foul-mouthed little child. I said, why? He said, I once rubbed my cigarette brushed against you by accident, and you just looked at me and said, chutia. So I said, well, what else do you think I should have said? If you go around burning your baby with a cigarette, And anyway, then it just unfolded in this very crazy way. And it was, I, through him and many others, learned very deep lessons about addiction and all that. But it was still a very, there was something so charming about him. There was him meeting his 2 children who he's never met in his life. But by the time the encounter ended, he had disappeared with whatever little money we had to buy booze, and whatever.
The book has a lot of fascinating men. Your brother is kind of the central, not central, but he's a very important figure. And then there's Sanjay and Pradeep and your father and your uncle, of course. And I think at one point you even write that, dear reader, if you're kind of expecting clean resolutions, then read no further, right? Like, that's not what your life is about. But I'm kind of curious about when you write about JC, your old love, and you have this very compelling part about how you were wound up with each other. This was love, this was you and Goa, etc. What is it like to revisit old relationships and to write about them like that?
Well, mostly all my relationships are not old, they're still current.
Good to know.
Yeah. Not JC, but everyone else. So it was actually...
but isn't that more difficult to write about current?
Well, you see, the thing is, this is not about, these current, firstly, it's important, and secondly, it's, if I have anything that I'm proud of, it's the fact that I have a life that is so full of unconventional love, and so full of azadi, So in fact, I took the wildest risk of my life, and I decided that Mother Mary Comes to Me will not be released in Delhi, but in Cochin, in Kerala. And my publishers from New York and from London, everyone showed up there. And we were looking for a hall, and we found a hall in St. Teresa's College, which was called Mother Mary Hall, by mistake. By chance, I'm sorry. So, and my brother, who's a singer, he sings rock and roll, so he sang Let It Be, and I had to come up and say, look, there are 3 Mother Marys here, and let's not confuse them. One is the one who the hall is named after. One is Paul McCartney's mother, who said Let It Be, and one is Mary Roy, who said never let it be, And my brother's like, look, I know you all, and every character in the book, except for JC, I think, was in the hall, all of them. And my brother sang, and then he said, I know you all are gathered here for this great Mrs. Roy or whatever. I don't have the same feelings for her as my sister. And I just want you to know that my sister, she's my father's daughter. She looks like him, she walks like him, she laughs like him, she jokes like him. I said, but do I drink like him? He's like, I'm not sure. So I said, okay.
Oh, I've just been told it's time for Q&A. That went very fast. If you have a question, do raise your hand and we bring a mic. Sorry, there's a hand right in front.
Hi. You talked about finding your voice and authenticity, which is so important for a writer.
I never used that word.
Sorry.
I can't see.
I'm using those words. The question was actually, growing up in the 70s, you talked about the bad fiction that was available. There's very little being written, especially in the English language, And if it was, the stories were out there, It was elegant writers like R.K. and Kamla Markandeya and Mulkraj, but it was never about our stories, right? It wasn't about, the Ashcan realism of inner city India. And I was just wondering how did you develop that voice, and how did it come to you, and that journey?
So, I mean, sorry to have responded a little sharply to the word authentic, because somehow I think that's such a loaded word in some ways, because I don't know, I suppose it segues into a sort of purity which bothers me all the time, especially since I grew up in a place where I was constantly being told that I wasn't authentic. I wasn't an authentic Syrian Christian, and nobody was going to marry me, as if I was longing to marry them. But anyway, but how, I mean, this book really does, I don't know if you've read it, but it has, I mean, it really traces that, because I studied architecture, and I knew by the time I was in the final year that I wasn't going to be the architect that's going to kind of design buildings for rich people or whatever. I became very interested in cities and city planning and how power works in a city. And then I worked in cinema as a screenplay writer and a production designer, and writing screenplays really makes you pay attention to dialogue, so I learned the writing of dialogue there. I learned how to structure things, I think, in the study of architecture, got involved in so much legal stuff, you learn this kind of legal language. So all kinds of languages contribute to how you develop your own language. And my friends make fun of me. They say, Roy, you want to see how Roy reads a book? She's like this. No. So because to me language is so important, and like I said, like a musical note, and it's something that you hone, that you work on, that you practice, like an athlete might practice running, or a swimmer might practice swimming, So that hunt for language has been my top priority all my life, and it's also very troubling sometimes, because, for example, Mother Mary is translated, all my books, but this one is being translated and has been already translated into 35 or 40 languages, Indian languages 13. Sometimes I look at a translation, even if I don't understand the language, I sit with someone who does, as I explain, and I just get heartbroken because they treat it as if it's a report or something, like I just need to translate the facts. I don't have to translate the rhythm. I don't have to translate the music of it, So, I mean, the short answer to your question, I prepare like a dancer prepares to dance, or an athlete prepares to do sport or anything. It requires a lot of rigor.
I'm not sure where the mic is somewhere. Okay.
Good evening, ma'am. Firstly, I want to say I'm so glad I got to be here. I'm a huge admirer of you. You're my most favorite author, and all of my family is. My sister was supposed to be here, but she ran later, and I think she's watching the live streaming. So when I read your books, something that's very striking is how you address these nuances of caste system, sexuality, love, controversial topics that in the society that we live in. And myself, I consider myself passionate in writing, but when I think about writing about these issues, I find this invisible wall, because growing up in this society, there are judgments, there are naysayers, there are people who are so against some of these views that you might have addressed. So I just want to ask you how you navigate when you write or talk about these issues, and what would you say for someone who aspires to do the same in this society that we live in? Thank you so much.
Well, I think, it's a difficult question to answer, because it requires a kind of analysis which I actually try not to do when I'm writing, you know. And I don't look at things as issues. I don't look at things as subjects. Maybe there's something fortunate in growing up in, like I grew up, as in The God of Small Things is set in the village where I grew up in Aimanam. But in Kerala, a village is not like a village in many other places in India, because I grew up in a house full of cosmopolitans. My uncle, who you refer to, G. Isaac, in the book, he was a Rhodes Scholar who gave up to run a pickle factory, and then he said, I'm a Marxist, so he organized his labor against himself. And then he, you know, so it was, and yet I was also witness to caste. I didn't have to read or grow up. I could see it right there, you know. So it was a strange combination of the ability to be, in some ways, access cosmopolitanism and read Shakespeare and read so much, and also witness exactly what's going on in rural India. So you grew up, you didn't have to address subjects or issues, you just had to write what you lived and saw and what was done to the people that you loved or your friends or whatever. I also grew up outside of that family thing. I grew, you know, because of the situation I was in, there was no one there to indoctrinate me or tell me don't do this or don't go to so-and-so's house or don't, you know, it was a sort of, oddly, the neglect itself came as a sort of freedom, you know. So, but as a young person, if you're trying to write, I must tell you that you should not be worrying about what other people think. You have to write what you want to write first and forget about that criticism that comes. That's a later stage, you know. When I wrote The God of Small Things, I really thought like 300 people at most would read it, you know. But you can't start spooking yourself before you write.
Thank you very much. Such a lovely conversation. I had two quick questions. The first was when I was listening to you, and I guess it's unsurprising when you listen to a writer because they have the ability to express themselves much more articulately than most people do. But this description of something happening to you and feeling as if you're also, part of you is watching it from, like you described, watching it from a fan, is really something that strikes a real chord, because you often see that. I know you didn't talk about trauma, but it's almost a kind of classical description of a kind of what people describe as a dissociative state. So it was kind of an interesting description of what was going on, but also being an observer as part of that. And then the second part that kind of struck me was this idea that at some point you meet the person as an adult, as kind of adult to adult, which gives this feeling of time that you can't meet that person at a developmental point because it's impossible. But at some point you can see yourself and them in a different enough way that you can see that as adults, and you describe that, and then you also talk a little bit about the kind of foreword in the book, The God of Small Things, where it's kind of different to, as your brother points out, to by the time you write this book. So my question was really about how much time do you think it takes for that meeting as adults, and is it really something that depends on time? Like, is it just a temporal thing that it can only happen with time, and for some people it can't happen? And the other bit that seems to be required is your degree of insight. Like, at some point you need to be generous enough in your spirit, and you also need to be insightful enough into yourself to be able to think this is going to be a good thing to arrive at that. And my second question...
Sorry, I think we need to... I think there are lots of people who have questions.
Yeah, fine, okay.
And we also have a reading at the end. So yes, we are short on time.
So, you know, I don't know how to answer that question because, you know, there's so many variables, as in, you know, to leave home when you're 17 years old is such a risk. And if you read the book, you see that I could have
ended in jail. So many things could have happened which didn't happen, which then allows you to be magnanimous, maybe. Maybe had I fallen on my face, had I not found this language that pulled me out of the life that was pretty much prescribed to me, a life that was not going to end well, maybe this would have been a different book. Maybe my relationship with her would have been different, you know? So it's not for me to kind of preach to people who've been through traumatic events about how to think or what to do, because there's so many variables, you know? So I'm not even for a moment sort of trying to tell people how to think about their lives. You know, I'm just talking about a whole, and I mean, this is just the deeply personal part, but this is also blown into a huge political story as well, you know. So I don't have any prescriptions, honestly.
Very good evening, ma'am, and thank you for that insightful, yeah, right here.
Back. Okay.
Thank you for that insightful conversation and being so candid about it, and the passion with which you use the word language, it kind of flows, I guess. Two short questions. One is, if you could talk about the title of the book and the picture behind and how that came into place. And the second question is, in which language do you think? And the last question, a very short one, in which language do you really swear?
Okay, these are lovely questions. So let me start with the title. The title, all the titles of my books and essays, they just arrive, you know. So Mother Mary comes to me, just arrived and sat on my wrist like a butterfly. I mean, there was never going to be another title to this book. Unfortunately, in Europe, it does have a different title because Mother Mary comes to me as a totally different, you know, thing. So it's called My Shelter and My Storm in, you know, Italy and all that. But here, Mother Mary Comes to Me was just always going to be the title. The photograph on this cover, this was taken by my friend Carlo Boldrini, who is like a big character in the book. He was an Italian architect who was generally hanging around Delhi. He was half monk, half journalist, half photographer. But essentially, he's the man who actually settled my organs in my body and my political way of thinking and everything. This was a photo he took, and I don't know how the publishers got hold of it, but they were just like, every publisher in every language in every country was like, we have to use it. So I said, you can, but then you have to have the older me on the back, because that's politics. You know, I don't want to be sold as this chick when I'm not one now. So then, of course, as you know, as always, forever, there's a case filed against me because, I mean, the burden of which was that she's showing intellectual arrogance by smoking on the cover. So I asked the lawyers in Penguin, I said, can we say that, yeah, like guilty as charged for intellectual arrogance, and yeah, I do smoke, but what is the connection between the two? I don't know, legally, but anyway. And what language do I swear in? Well, if you were to read this book, you'd get it, because there's a long part about swearing in it. Mostly, what language do I think in? I think in many languages, and I move between many languages, as all of us do, I think. But there's a part here where I joined the School of Architecture, and you know, all of us came from different parts of the country, and none of us had any language in common really, because the people in the hostel were not Delhi people. No, we were from Odisha, from Bengal, from the Northeast, from Kerala, from here, there. And my best friend is and continues to be my friend Golak, who's a painter, and he was from Odisha.
and he had no language in common because he only spoke Odia and I spoke English and Malayalam. And the seniors brought him to me to try and humiliate him and, say, tell this girl what you like about her. So he said, I like her hair. And then we became pals forever. And then we tried to learn Hindi. And the way we tried to learn Hindi was to invent our own galis. So Golak's favorite was Chipkali ki bund ki pasina. Like you bead of sweat in a lizard's asshole. And otherwise it would be like, Tumhara 3 din ke liye tatti band ho jayega. So we were very, very sweary people. And then, of course, there was Carlo, who was also pretty bad. And so, in fact, recently I was in a gym and there was this Italian young guy next to me. And I just looked at him and said, ma vaffanculo, which is Italian swear, like whatever, So my array of galis also exists in many languages. There's a whole dictionary there.
We have time for just one more question and then we have a reading. So.
Arundhati, I want you to tell us something about how much nature played as a panacea to you, because you speak so beautifully about the stream and the tadpoles and the fish which you find, and Kerala after the monsoons. So tell us something about how much, in all your troubles and things that happen, nature also was powerful, a role in your life.
Well, when I, basically after my mother separated from my father, then ultimately ended up in Imanam, in this village, in this big house where, there was a constant humiliation of the fact that she didn't have money and she was living there. So I used to just not live in the house, and I lived on the river. And I knew every leaf and beetle and fish and bird and squirrel and everything. And when I came to Delhi, of course, there was none of that. There was another kind of landscape, which I also learned to love, this wild city. And it's, but even now in my house, it's like there are monkeys and hornbills and all. I mean, somehow it's a continuing circus of some sort with non-human creatures and myself. But when after I wrote this movie, Colin Michani Gives It Those Ones, which was my first screenplay. After that, when I decided to try and write a novel, the challenge to me was, can you write your river? And so in all my books, human beings are not necessarily the center of my attention. For me, they are just one part of a universe which contains a lot of other things, So, yeah, I like that little cheer for Annie. It just got released, I think. Some of you must know, after so many years. I don't know what's going on with the world, but it was showing in cinema halls all over the place, but yeah.
Thank you. I think to end, we'll do a reading. And after the reading, there is a signing. But first, let's have the reading.
Yeah, I'll just read like a few minutes from the end of the book. So this is after Mrs. Roy left us, and after this most bizarre funeral, which was a novel in itself. And I said, that first night in a Mrs. Roy-less world, I spun unanchored in a space with no coordinates. I had constructed myself around her. I had grown into the peculiar shape that I am to accommodate her. I had never wanted to defeat her, never wanted to win. I always wanted her to go out like a queen. And now that she had, I didn't make sense to myself anymore. A friend in Delhi who hadn't ever met her sent me a couplet in Urdu that comforted me more than anything else that anyone said. It allowed me to see her happy, liberated from a body that had limited her so severely. I saw her walking through her campus once more, breathing easily, bending to smell the flowers, looking up to count the jackfruit and coconuts, inspecting every corner of it in a way she hadn't done in years. आज की रात मैं घूमूंगा खुली सड़कों पर, आज की रात मुझे ख्वाबों से फुर्सत कुछ है. Tonight I will wander on open roads. Tonight I have some time off, even from my dreams. We decided that we'd put some of her ashes in the Meenachal River, some in the ocean, and some we would bury at the base of the clump of tall bamboo behind her house, where I would make her a grove instead of a grave. I don't understand why putting her ashes in the ocean haunts me in the way that it does. Watching the waves take her away was wrenching. I cannot seem to get over it. I see her clearly all the time. She's walking on the water, but she's using a walker. She's all alone under the stars. There's nobody to carry her inhaler and her other paraphernalia. Nobody to put on her socks, take them off, put on a fan, put it off, switch on the light, switch it off. Nobody to carry her jar of jujubes. I want to do that for her, but I can't get to her. We built the grove at the base of a clump of towering bamboo that I think had been there from the Mottakunna days, before the school was built. It was speaking bamboo, and it seemed to have a lot to say, many stories to tell. It moaned and creaked and rustled and whistled and sang all day long. We raised a low platform of unpolished black granite, the size of a small room, with 4 old, rough stone pillars at each corner, supporting a teakwood trellis. We trained creepers to grow over the trellis, and around that little structure, we planted all the things she loved: banana trees, ginger, chili, pepper, ferns, and orchids. Oh, I should say that, the whole thing was that because of her battle with the church, we could not, there was no way of her having a grave in any church. On the center of the granite platform, we placed an antique stone trough fitted with a motor to oxygenate the water so that fish and frogs and water lilies could live in it. A square slab of rough stone supported from behind slanted into the long side of the trough like a headstone. Along the length of the stone trough, with a nod to Toni Morrison, we carved "Beloved." On the headstone it said, "Mary Roy, dreamer, warrior, teacher." It did not occur to either my brother or to me to say the usual things, mother of or wife of. She wouldn't have liked that. Those were not the stripes she had strived to earn. Once the house was repaired and the memorial completed, a wave of grief crashed over me again. I felt as though the only way to stave it off would be to keep working on the memorial and keep tinkering with it forever. Kuttapen, that's what I call my brother. What should we do now? Shall we put surround sound speakers on the pillars and play Black Sabbath? No, Kuriakos, which is what he calls me. She'll jump out. But I want her to. I want her back. No, enough now. Let her be. I still see her clearly all the time. She's walking on the high seas, through storm and stillness, through sunshine and rain. She's walking when the tide is high. She's walking when it's low. She's walking when I wake up and when I drift into sleep. She takes small, unsteady steps, but she keeps going. She stops only to watch ships pass or to grimace at the small continents of garbage bobbing by. She's always alone. She's on the Red Sea. She's in Morocco. She's off the coast of Scotland. She's in the Galapagos. Still watching, still learning, still practicing her Malayalam mosquito poem, still plotting her next move. She isn't dressed very well. She's in a white salwar and a soft, oversized red-brown t-shirt, tea-brown t-shirt, and her high-top basketball shoes for stability. Every now and then she stops as though she's looking at herself in her bedroom mirror. Then she straightens her shoulders and walks on the way she always did. As for me, I stand on the shore and look at her through the binoculars I've made with my eyes. The wind is picking up. I must straighten my shoulders too, because A, anything can happen to anyone, and B, it's best to be prepared. Bye, oh Mart Roy. I'll be seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arundhati and Nandini, for this incredible evening. What a moving note to end on. Please, can we have another huge round of applause? It was such a privilege to listen to your stories, Arundhati, after devouring your books and writing for so many years. You talked about language, your relationship with language, in such a beautiful way, that it is your home, that you found it early, you hunted it down and drank its inky blood. On behalf of everyone here, on behalf of everyone here, I think I can safely say that we are so grateful to you for being that huntress with language and with everything else that you do. We're very lucky indeed that we're able to see the world through your words, written and spoken. Thank you for sharing your life and ideas with us today, talking about, of course, Mother Mary comes to me, but also about family, love, identity, authenticity or inauthenticity, and humanity with such candor and humor. Before we close and begin the book signing, I want to thank our ISL interpreters once again. And thank you to all of you for being such an engaged and stellar audience. Give us a minute now while we set up the stage for Arundhati to sign books. Please remain seated and ensure that you've put your post-it inside the page that you want signed. My colleague will be on stage. She'll call out token numbers and we will call you up on stage to get your book signed and for a very quick photograph. We really appreciate We really appreciate your cooperation in making sure that this process is as smooth and seamless for Arundhati as possible. Thank you once again to all of you for joining us. Thank you to Penguin, and thank you to Arundhati Roy for this wonderful conversation.